أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome back to the third episode in a four-part series where we have been focusing on reflections and stories from Surah Al-Kahf, which is chapter 18 of the Qur'an. Allah chose to preserve all of these stories for us to be able to learn from, and we hope that you've been able to take some lessons and inspirations from these short episodes that we've been putting together. Today, inshallah, we'll be hearing about the story of Musa and Al-Khidr. And telling that story with us today is Seema Ahmad. She has been a long active community volunteer and been part of the Islamic Society of Britain for many years. And so with that, inshallah, let's get started. Bismillah.
Thank you, Najda. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Everybody loves a good story. Who doesn't? It doesn't matter how old you are, where you are, everybody loves an engaging story. Sometimes we know that the Quran is full of so many stories. And we know that they're not there, just for the sake of it. There's a reason why they're there. There's something that we need to learn. And sometimes those lessons that we learn from the stories are easily apparent. And sometimes we need to reflect and dig a little bit deeper to find out, sort of even more, what is it that Allah wants us to learn from them. So I'm going to be covering the third story in Surah Kahf, which involves Musa and Khidr. And this is covered in the verses 60 to 82 of Surah Kahf. But there's also quite a long Hadith Bukhari that gives further details linked to these verses of the Quran. And I'm going to be using some of the information from that Hadith as well. So let's set the scene and begin the story. So Musa alayhi salam was addressing the Bani Israel when somebody asked him, who is the most knowledgeable person amongst the people? Now, Musa alayhi salam, he was a wise man. He had experienced more than your average person. I mean, after all, he was a prophet, as well as having a special relationship with Allah. And he immediately responded and said, I am the most knowledgeable. It's most likely, it's quite possible that he was the most knowledgeable person amongst the people, but that was not the response that Allah was looking for or expected of him. Musa should have attributed absolute knowledge to Allah. So Allah told Musa alayhi salam that there is in fact a servant who has more knowledge than him, and he can be found at the junction where two seas meet. Now, Musa alayhi salam, he must have been quite surprised to hear that there is someone who has more knowledge than him, because he'd obviously not met him. But that, hearing that didn't deflate his ego at all. He could have felt embarrassed that he just announced publicly, something, and it was, no other than God himself who'd corrected him. He could have felt like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I just want to hide away. I don't want to show my face. But that's not the response that we see him give. So his response was to ask Allah how he could meet this person. He wanted to be in his company and learn from him. And the other thing is that Musa alayhi salam could have just asked Allah and said, well, oh, okay, so there's somebody who has more knowledge than me. So tell me about him. I want to know what's special. So he could have just asked Allah for the information. But it's a bit like, in this day and age, we know that, you literally just have to think of a question and immediately you can tap it into your phone, computer, whatever, and search for the answer. And we get answers, within seconds. If, for example, you want to know what the highest mountain is in centimeters or where Timbuktu is, you could find the answer literally in seconds. However, there's something special to be gained through human interaction and experiencing the world. And it was clearly important for Musa alayhi salam to actually meet this person and be in this person's company. So Musa alayhi salam asked Allah and said, well, how can I find this person? And Allah told him to take a fish in a basket and travel until the place where you lose the fish, and that is where you'll find him. And, it all sounds really cryptic. And it sort of like adds to the story, makes it more mysterious and engaging and interesting. We've got things like information like, the place where the two seas meet, the mysterious person that you have to find, the fish that will disappear from the basket to signify the spot where you'll find that person. And of course, we have no idea how long this journey to the place is going to take. But we do know that Musa alayhi salam was prepared to travel for years if that's what it took to find him. So that shows his commitment and his dedication to absolutely, he wants to find out, what is this special knowledge, or what is this knowledge that this other person has. So Musa alayhi salam, he was determined to meet this learned person. And so he set off with his young servant or companion, and his name was Yusha ibn Nun. And we know that from that hadith. So Yusha ibn Nun, also known as Joshua. And so they both set off. And the hadith is actually the hadith that also tells us that the person that they were looking for, his name is Khidr, and because the name isn't given in the Quran. And he's widely considered to be a prophet who was given a special type of knowledge from Allah, a knowledge that Musa alayhi salam had not been given. Musa alayhi salam had been given incredible knowledge. He'd been given, scriptures, he'd been given the commandments. So he was given so much, but there was clearly a knowledge that he didn't have. In fact, Musa didn't even know what this special knowledge was, which is why he wanted to meet Khidr and learn from him. So Musa and his servant, his young servant, and it's always nice to know, there's another young character in this story, just as there was in the Sleepers of the Cave. So this Musa and this young servant traveled until they reached a rock, and they decided to take a nap there. And actually, this is where the fish miraculously left the basket and made its way into the sea. And actually, Yusha saw that, but I don't know whether he took a nap too, but on waking, they continued their journey. So nothing was said. They continued their journey, and they continued, quite a way. And until they got to the point where they felt exhausted, and they stopped. And that's when Musa alayhi salam asked his young servant and said, "Oh, bring me some breakfast. We're hungry. Let's have something to eat." And that's when the boy noticed, oh, the fish was missing. And that's when he remembered what had happened and how the fish had strangely entered the sea. And he said, oh dear, and he immediately said, Shaitan made me forget. And, there was just no other explanation how something so incredible, some people say that this fish was actually a cooked fish, which makes it, it obviously is miraculous. So how anyone could forget something so miraculous was just beyond him. And even he thought, well, it must have been Shaitan that made me forget. So Musa alayhi salam said, well, that was what we were looking for. That was the spot we were looking for. And then he said, well, we're going to have to go back and retrace our steps. Now, quite often, you know that they've been walking, they're hungry. He's reached the point where he's hungry, they're tired. And so, quite often when we're hungry and tired, and of course, we know what that can feel like to a small extent because it's Ramadan and we're fasting, and we've heard people can become hangry. And sometimes that can make people short-tempered, easily annoyed, and less patient. And it must have been quite frustrating to know that they'd missed the spot that they've been traveling for, trying to find for all this time, and now they're going to have to retrace their steps. But he didn't get angry with Yusha or blame him, because he was so focused on finding Khidr. He was so focused on his mission that that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to turn back immediately and find this person. So the pair went back and they found Khidr. And the Quran describes him as a man to whom we have granted our mercy and whom we have given knowledge of our own, a special knowledge. Now, Musa alayhi salam said to him, can I follow you, please, so that you can teach me some of this special guidance that you've been given, or this special knowledge that you've been taught. And Khidr immediately responded to him and said, you're not going to have, you won't be able to be patient. You won't be able to be. How can you possibly be patient about matters that are beyond your knowledge? So that was the response that was given to him. And Musa alayhi salam said, inshallah, you will find me patient and I won't disobey, anything that you say. And so Khidr said, well, fine, but if you follow me, just don't ask me anything. Keep quiet. Don't ask me anything until I mention it to you myself. Now, Musa alayhi salam, he himself was a leader and a teacher, but he felt no hesitation at humbly becoming the student when he met Khidr and accepting his conditions, the conditions that he'd laid on him, put on him. So humility is an important attribute to learning. Now, Musa and Khidr, they walk along the shore together until they come to a ship that was owned by some poor people. And they asked if they could take a ride on that ship. And, quite often, as we know, the prophets, they're very poor. I think, I can't think of a, single prophet that is affluent and, has plenty of money. So they were poor. And by the way, I have a little prop here, a prop to break up the monotony of just looking at me. So we have a ship. And I have to tell you, this is not, oh, hang on. Can you see it there? So it is not, it's a little bit blurred, isn't it? Because I've got the blur on. But anyway, I have a ship. This is not the ship I have to inform you, but it's just a ship to show. So they approached the people, and they seemed to know Khidr, and they were familiar with him, and they said, "Oh yes, come on board with his companion," and they didn't charge them for this ride. Which was very kind of them. So obviously we see that they're very kind, generous people. Now, while they were on this ship, while they were on board, they saw a sparrow dip its beak into the water. And Khidr said to Musa, "My knowledge and your knowledge have not decreased Allah's knowledge except as much as the water in the sea in its beak." And we're looking at two of the most knowledgeable people on the planet at the time. And so that's what he said. So, he said that, and then suddenly Khidr, either with an axe or something, he broke a hole in the ship with an axe, and Moses was shocked. He couldn't understand and asked Khidr, what are you doing? Why have you done this awful thing? The people have been so kind to them, and they hadn't even charged them for the ride, and Khidr had damaged their ship, which he said that could cause this ship and it could cause the passengers to drown and the ship to sink. Khidr immediately responded and said, "I told you you wouldn't be able to remain patient with me." Now, Musa immediately accepted that he was at fault, that he had broken the agreement. And so, he said that, "Oh, okay, sorry, I forgot. And, don't be hard on me. Give me another chance." And so they continued on their journey together. They'd left the ship and walked a little bit further, where they came across a young boy. And what Musa witnessed next was even worse. Khidr killed the young boy. This absolutely horrified Musa, and he couldn't help but speak out. And he said, "Have you just killed an innocent? He hasn't killed anyone. That's such an awful thing to do. That's just terrible." He just couldn't understand what was going on. And again, Khidr told Musa, "Didn't I tell you wouldn't be able to remain patient with me?" And then Musa alayhi salam thought, okay, yep, he realized he'd broken the agreement again. And he said, "Look, if I ask about anything else again, then you can exclude me from your company." And so Musa alayhi salam put that condition on himself. It wasn't Khidr that said, "Look, I'm going to give you this many chances, and if you do it again." It was Musa himself who actually put that condition on himself. So the two men continued until they came to a village. And, the normal custom at that time was to show hospitality to travelers and to new people, if they entered your village or your area. So you'd offer them food and drink. And Musa and Khidr, by this time, they were hungry and thirsty. And so they asked the villagers, and they asked some people for food, but they found the villagers to be extremely inhospitable and, in fact, quite rude and harsh. They didn't offer them anything. And this was really quite unheard of and quite unusual. And also they didn't treat them well at all. And so Khidr saw a wall as they were leaving this village. He saw a wall, and it looked like it was about to keel over, like it was about to collapse. And so Khidr repaired this wall. And again, it didn't make any sense to Musa. Why was he doing this? These people had didn't treat them very well, hadn't given them food, and there he was repairing this wall. And after the work, Musa said to him, well, you could have at least asked for a wage for your work. Perhaps he was thinking, if you'd been given some money, perhaps we could have bought some food. But even that asking, because he was supposed to keep quiet, and so Khidr said, look, this is where we part our ways. And but he wanted to explain about the things that Musa wasn't able to remain patient about. So this is where Khidr gave some explanation about what he'd seen. So Khidr then explained, and he said, the ship belonged to some poor people who made their living from the sea. And there was a king who was seizing all the good ships in that area. And he damaged the ship just enough so that the king would not seize that ship, but also not too much, so so it could easily be repaired afterwards. So this would enable them to continue to earn a living using the ship. So what about killing this innocent child? No one has the right to kill an innocent child. We know that. This command was only for Khidr, and he was acting on Allah's instructions with knowledge that was only given to him. So the parents of the child were righteous, and the Qur'an the child would have grown up to become a wicked person and cause the parents and perhaps others a lot of heartache and pain. And Allah wanted to replace this child with one who was pure and compassionate and would bring the parents joy and comfort. And regarding the wall, Khidr explained that it belonged to two orphan boys in the village. Their father was a righteous man who'd buried some treasure, perhaps some money or things for them, which belonged to him, which would obviously become theirs. And Allah wanted the boys to retrieve the treasure, but at an appropriate age when they'd reached maturity. Khidr added that he did not do any of these things of his own accord. These were all, under Allah's command. So let's just reflect a little bit further on these three scenarios that are presented here. So all of these three scenarios feature good people. The ship owners were generous, friendly, and helpful, showing good character. The parents were people of faith, and the father of the children was a righteous man. What to us seemed like terrible things happened to good and righteous people. The Quran says, do people think they will be left alone after saying we believe without being put to the test? The ship being broken turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as it meant it wasn't taken by this king, this tyrant, this king who was taking all the ships. So something that seems like a calamity to us may be a blessing in the long run. We've heard of situations where, people have been rushing to catch a flight and they're gutted when they miss it. And they only find out later on that actually that flight crashed and all the passengers died. So you only realize afterwards sometimes that you have actually been saved from something worse. And the Quran says, and it may be that you dislike a thing which is good for you, and that you like a thing which is bad for you. Allah knows, but you do not know. Now, the pain of losing a child is unimaginable, and it's a huge test for anyone. However, the parents were saved from the trial of having a son who would have caused them pain and may have affected their own faith. So he could have grown up to be a tyrant, arrogant, disobedient, which would have been even more unbearable than losing him at a young age. The boy was taken as a child, so he was saved from accountability, because we know that all children are pure, and so he would have been saved from the accountability, and the righteous parents were given a better replacement in this life too. The Quran says, if Allah knows any good in your hearts, he will give you something better than what was taken from you, and this is for the righteous. The people of the village could not be trusted to even take care of, to take care of the orphans or with the money. They showed bad character and miserliness, lack of hospitality and care to Musa and Khidr. And that's why the righteous father buried the treasure that belonged to his children, because he knew that they were living in a community where, they certainly weren't going to be looked after. Now, imagine if, let's imagine, I don't know, but if the mother were alive, she imagine that she must have been praying and worrying about these children every day. She would have been making dua, and I'm sure the father would have made dua for these children too. And so the answer to those prayers and the intention with which the father buried the treasure were fulfilled many years later when the boys had reached maturity and could take care of their money and their lives. So Allah's plan became apparent many years later. The boys may even have remembered the time when two strangers came to the village, were treated badly, but rebuilt the wall under which their treasure was buried. So I just want to recap the whole story and, see what sort of lessons we can pick up from this story. And one of them is that Musa alayhi salam, he was determined and committed to seek beneficial knowledge, even if he had to travel for years and had to endure fatigue and hunger. So, this thirst for knowledge that he had. Also, we see that Musa alayhi salam, he showed humility. From being the most knowledgeable leader and teacher, he willfully became a humble student when he met Khidr. And also the amount of, we learned that the amount of knowledge given to us is negligible compared to Allah's. We had that story of the sparrow and, when Khidr explained that my knowledge and your knowledge have not decreased Allah's knowledge except as much as the water of the sea in its beak. And also towards the end of Surah Al-Kahf, there's also the following verse, which is lovely. And it says, if the whole ocean were ink, for writing the words of my Lord, it would not dry before those words were exhausted, even if we were to add another ocean to it. It just gives us an idea of the sort of knowledge that, that Allah has. Also, those of us who are familiar with Ayatul Kursi, in Ayatul Kursi it says, he knows what is before them and what is after them, but they do not comprehend any of his knowledge except what he wills. So all knowledge is with Allah. We are only able to understand things with our human limitations. There is knowledge that we've been given access to, and there is knowledge that we can't access. And so what Musa alayhi salam witnessed was beyond our human understanding. He was given some of that knowledge of the unknown through Khidr. So, when we do something, another lesson is that when we do something for the sake of Allah, we don't need or seek any acknowledgement or reward from others. The villagers treated Musa and Khidr badly, but Khidr rebuilt the wall and asked for nothing in return. He did good in return for their bad treatment. And the Qur'an says, repel evil with what is better. So we have no idea how prayers will be answered, when or in what way. We've got the broken ship. And I'm sure that those people, that they were aware of this tyrant who was taking these ships, and perhaps they made dua, for themselves because they weren't sure, when this ship would be taken. And the story of where the ship was broken at that immediate time, you can imagine they must have been furious. This person that they knew had damaged their ship, and what a terrible thing to do. But it would have become apparent quite soon that actually this was a blessing in disguise. And also, the death of the boy, the parents actually in this case would never know the full story behind what happened until the akhirah. So some things will become apparent soon. Some things will never become apparent in this life. We'll never know why something happened. And then you've got the fixing of the wall. The reason became apparent many years later that, so the children had to reach maturity. So the whole reason why that happens. So sometimes we'll know very soon why something happens. Sometimes we'll never know. Sometimes it can take many, many years. And it's like, now I know why that had to happen and the benefits of it. So to conclude, all tests are for our benefit, to forgive our sins and draw us closer to Allah. When a believer faces a problem, we pray more, we give more charity, and we try to strengthen our bond with Allah. We put our trust in him and try to be patient through our difficulties, knowing he only wants good for us. Some things may not make sense to us because we don't have full knowledge of Allah's plan. We're told by Allah to have patience in times of trial, even though it is in times of trial that it may be most difficult to be patient. If the curtain were to be lifted, as it was for Musa in this story, maybe we would see that what we thought was something terrible was actually a great blessing and a mercy. Only Allah has complete knowledge. Ours is limited to what he allows us to know. And there was just one last thing I wanted to say. And so this is that when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was telling this story, to his companions. He said he wished that Musa had been patient so that they could have learned more of their story. And I love that, because it's like the Prophet, peace be upon him, saying, oh, I wish Musa had been more patient, because that means the story would have gone on longer and we would have learned more. So clearly he enjoyed the story, but he also, was really drawn into it and wanted, more facts, more information. And if only Musa had been more patient. So that's the end of my summary, and I hope there was something that we're able to learn from that.
That was beautiful, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for that. And as you were telling that story, the one thing that one of the wonders really of all the stories in the Quran is every time I listen to them or reflect on them, there's something else that I take away from it. And what struck me is that throughout that, Moses, the graciousness actually of how he responds to the whole situation. So initially, being told that there's somebody is more knowledgeable than him, and even when he's acknowledging, okay, I said I wasn't going to do this, and I'm doing it, okay, and he puts those conditions on himself. And I think there's a lot to learn even just from that interaction between Musa and I think there's just in that really kind of struck me. And the patience as well. So I guess it's hard when you're young, especially when you're young, and this is the first test or the first difficult thing really that you're kind of coming through and you're experiencing, to kind of force yourself to have that big picture view and take a step back. And I think there's what's so beautiful about this story, I think, because you might think as a young person you're struggling with this, but even Musa, one of the greatest prophets, struggled in the moment to have that patience. And there's kind of a bit of comfort in that as well, that that you'll come round, it will work out, you will understand, and just a bit of motivation in there as well to maintain the patience.
Yeah, it's always sort of, when you see like human weaknesses in people that you admire, yes, it sort of makes it more real. But yes, no, it is difficult to have patience, but it's that relationship with Allah, that bond with Allah that needs to be strengthened. And this is just it, that when difficulties come, you're either going to be one of those people that says, well, why me, and and run away, run further from Allah, which it's almost like the tests are like checks for ourselves. Yeah. Because we can be sitting here and life is fine, everything's fine, there's no real test, or you miss the bus, that's your, that may be the biggest test of the day. But actually, how we may think that, yes, I have strong faith, I've got this, I do my prayers, I do my this, I do my Qur'an reading, I am strong in faith. But actually, how do we know unless and until we are tested? Which is why Allah says, when we believe, we will all be tested. Yeah. So that it should come as no surprise. And the thing is, they even described, it could be loss of life, it could be loss of wealth, it could be so many tests that we will face. And we don't know what that will be. But those are the times when we need to, grab on more tightly to Allah and say, okay, what is it you want me to learn from this? I know that you are the source of goodness. I know there is something good in this that you want me to learn. And also, for the believer, these are things that draw us so much closer. Every day it's so easy to lose connection with Allah. But actually, we find that when we're going through those tests, those believers want to cling on tightly. Yeah. And, so there's good in things that may seem bad.
Yeah, and in those testing times, your du'as are often the most sincere and the most where you need Allah the most, and the most beautiful, and the ones that really, when you're pouring your heart out, and bring you so much closer to Allah.
I know, and it's almost like Allah's love saying, come closer, come closer. I'm giving you this because I want you closer to me. It's how you look at a situation. And that's what we're being told, that there is an unknown knowledge. I mean, there's, we only know a tiny bit, but there are things that are not known to us. We don't know, but we have to trust Allah. We have to put our trust completely in him. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for sharing this. And yeah, there's always so many more pearls of wisdom and lessons that we can take from that. And this is a really beautiful story for us to reflect on, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. And assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.